Hi, Patrick. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hey, Azam, it's great to be here from
Thank
sunny
you.
Finland.
That's great. How's the COVID situation, by the way, in Finland?
Well, I think they have it under control, and the vaccines are being rolled out right now, as they are across Europe in different stages. And actually, I'm about to get mine next week, I think, because I fall into this age category. So hopefully, I can travel after that.
Well, congratulations. And yes, it's kind of like impacting the whole, I believe, society in the last year or so. So since you are involved in the tech ecosystem a lot in Finland and Nordic and in Europe mostly, and or if you're involved globally, it would be great to hear from that. But what is Spinverse, and how are you involved with the ecosystem of startups and SMEs?
Okay, so what Spinverse does is basically help companies and organizations of all type build consortiums to tap into public funding in order to develop new technologies and capabilities. And Spinverse is based in Finland, in Espoo, but we have offices in Stockholm and Berlin as well. We're about 60 people. We've been going since about 2004 and have successfully managed to get funding of over a couple of billion euros of funding over the last decade or so across various different instruments. And what we do is basically we tap into these Horizon Europe funding calls, for example, or national funding calls, and build consortiums between corporations, SMEs, universities, research organizations, and startups to actually solve a particular problem. And once the funding is secured, then these projects can last 2, 3, 4 years, of course. So part of the puzzle is actually figuring out which combinations of organizations can work together. And there's a huge trend in Europe at the moment towards this open innovation rather than doing all of the R&D internally in your own organization. And by extension, creating new value chains and creating new ecosystems that spin off of these projects as well.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So it's and Spinverse, we basically cut across all technologies and industries. So the division that I run, which is digital industries, we focus on healthcare technologies, electronics, ICT, smart cities, and mobility. And then we have another team that focuses on sustainable industries, bioeconomy, battery technologies, and things like that. So the consortiums we help build basically comprise of organizations from all over Europe, from Southern Europe, Central Europe, Nordic countries, and also from associated countries that can participate in Horizon Europe activities. So we get to see a lot of interesting things that are going on.
Well, and that's amazing that you mentioned that you're also involved in the digital economies. And so 2 questions. What are the kind of like, since you are kind of like linking all these stakeholders together, what are the hurdles in this ecosystem? Like, because you have corporates, and then you have startups, you have academia, universities, and then entrepreneurs, and they all come from a different background, a different culture. How are you tackling all these different cultural experiences, and at the same time bringing everybody in the same page and create a coherency? And then we go to the next question.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's a complex thing because all of these different types of organizations that you've mentioned, corporates, SMEs, startups, research universities, they all run at different clock speeds, and they all have kind of different measurement systems and cultures. And then, of course, across Europe, we have different languages and rules and regulations as well. And so there's a whole bunch of different dependencies. But actually, many of the consortiums that we've built over the years, that the companies and organizations have worked in previous projects, so they already understand the game. But the trick really, I think, is the biggest challenge is probably getting this connection between the corporate and the universities and the research, because there's so much opportunity in that kind of gap. And if you can get them together, and if you can nudge them in the right direction and tap into the right mindset. And one of the challenges I think in the corporates is that sometimes they have quite a short myopic view of things. It's a quarter. It's how many deals have you closed this week or next week or this quarter? And whereas the research organizations and indeed startups, they tend to be a lot more longer term focused. And so you have to get the right sponsorships in the corporates and the right backing to be able to have not just the patience, but access to the right resources to combine in the right way. So it is a challenge. It's not just about the technology. It's, as you say, it's about the integration of all of these different organizations. But that's one of the most interesting parts of it. And of course, then the value chains that spin out of that, the new opportunities for these organizations to collaborate and develop and sell things together using each other's either R&D units or sales channels in the case of the corporates. So a lot of kind of additional benefits come out of these projects that are not necessarily clearly defined at the start.
Right. Well, that's quite challenging, and at the same time, whatever is challenging is also great to be involved, because challenge makes you innovate and advance better. I believe it creates different experiences, and especially that challenge is great since it is in the tech and kind of like entrepreneurship and startup. As you said, there might be a lot of spin-ups out of that. And in terms of the digital economy, how do you explain that COVID accelerated the digital economy? Now we can see even like households had to get into, for example, using different gadgets like Zoom in order to connect with each other, or even like the e-commerce was like booming because everybody was ordering everything online. How do you see that has actually accelerated the industry?
In terms of the industry that we work in, it definitely accelerated. But of course, there were face-to-face and service industries that have been dramatically negatively affected by it. But in terms of what we do, if you just take one example of working with organizations and prior to kind of March of last year, having to physically go either across Helsinki or over to Stockholm or to Denmark or Estonia to have a workshop and to get a decision made. So you have to do all of this traveling just for a 1 hour meeting. But now, we adapted in Spinverse very quickly. And because we work with partners from Italy to Iceland and everywhere in between, essentially we just, we enabled ourselves to be able to make decisions very, very quickly. And so did the partners in the consortium. So we went essentially from running around physically to different meetings to boom, 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 Zoom and team meetings and accelerating all of the projects a lot faster. And I think, a lot of organizations in Europe kind of adapted quite well to this. And at the same time, we also saw the opening of new funding instruments that were mainly designed to help solve innovation challenges that were kind of created through the COVID crisis, and also to solve particular healthcare issues associated with that. So there was actually a lot more funding opportunities that came our way as a result of it, and the way of many other organizations as well. So it's the digitization has enabled ourselves and many other organizations to get things done a lot faster and hopefully get things out to the market a lot faster as well, and observe the benefits of what we've created.
So does that mean that it created a sense of urgency, that that COVID was the sense of urgency that different organizations and even like VC industry was really kind of like a lot in terms of investing in the startups back in 2020. I believe it was Q2 and forward. And what was that because it was a sense of urgency, or was that because there was kind of like a booming in terms of technology that could enable us to tackle the coronavirus better in different, across different industries? Or was that because before COVID, there was so much regulation that was hurdling the innovation and research, specifically, for example, with the FDA approvals, like difficult policies to approve different drugs or even different perhaps medical equipments, and obviously COVID's urgency kind of like eased those regulations for FDA or even like different departments. What do you think was the key point?
I think it's a combination. There was a sense of urgency, there was a sense of necessity, and also opportunity. So I've seen a number of speakers who have kind of correctly identified that the last years basically accelerated many technologies ahead by 5 years, not necessarily in the technology itself, but in terms of their deployment into the public arena. For example, robotics in hospitals that were developed for hygiene solutions, evolving into transportation systems and accelerating and attracting even more funding for their development. And then, of course, the use of drones for drones are now kind of almost a business as usual tool in some areas, not just for deliveries and pickups, but inspections. And people are a lot more open-minded about, say, what the drone, which is of course a flying robot, what it can do. Whereas kind of prior to March of last year, there was a big part of the problem was convincing people that, do we really want this to happen? And essentially now people have seen many of the benefits of drone or robotics, and of course all of the data that these things throw out and what can be done with the data. So I think in the last year we've seen this compression of opportunity, and also taking technologies that are already very established and just getting them out there into the market. And of course, that's attracted even more people who figured out, we can build something new on top of this. Or, I'm on the board of advisors of a company that develops augmented reality for drone pilots. Mm-hmm. So instead of having to look at, it's sorry, did you say what's the name?
Yes.
Yeah, Arkeytyp Labs, based in Helsinki. So instead of the pilot basically looking down at the control all the time, they've got a Microsoft HoloLens on their head, and they've got an augmented reality view of where the drone is, and lots of kind of navigation information coming into them. So you've got a much better understanding of situational awareness. And that's just one example of, technologies coming together. So your AR coming together with your drone robotics, coming together with all kinds of other sensor and data applications. I think that it's necessity, urgency, and opportunity, all of coming together at the same time, essentially. And I think that we're never going to go back in terms of our closed mindsets to many of these things. I think it's just going to
expand,
hopefully expand, in a safe way.
What do you explain in terms of these different kind of like technologies merging together in different mindsets? It brings the word metaverse to me, and how we can see it's actually expanding. I mean, it started with the gaming industry, Fortnite and more, and now we see that they're using metaverse and augmented reality and virtual reality in a bigger way in terms of real estate, in terms of building, like technologies and companies like Decentraland, that they are decentralizing, and these like new aspects, which perhaps we can talk about that later. But you also mentioned the drone industry and using drones specifically for COVID, and it's actually quite interesting topic, because I believe there were some companies that they were kind of like enabling. They provided an enabled technology that could use drones to measure the temperature. Instead of sending a human to actually do that, just because of the physical distancing and so forth. And then they would actually save the data immediately, and that data would be obviously recorded on the cloud, and that would be accessible like live. So with that, how do you see and you're also involved with the space industry anyway, how do you see that the space economy is also growing, not just as a result of COVID, but even like now we see with the commercialization of space travel, adding private space to that, I mean, hopefully in the next few years. And how do you see that economy is growing and booming, and the VCs obviously in that front, how are they kind of like risk averse or risk tolerance towards that?
Yeah, it's really exciting because, as you say, there's so many. I mean, the cost of getting satellites into space is now dramatically coming down thanks to the work of SpaceX and others. And there's now so much money going towards developing both applications and technologies, making them smaller, making them more powerful, making the energy consumption lower. But it's not just about getting things up there. It's also about combining the data that, say, satellites can produce with other data sources, for example, with data that already exists, or with data from drones or from robots, or maritime applications. So how do you actually take all of that data, combine it in a very useful way, and then either make it available as a public service or commercialize it? I think that's really interesting. I'm on the board of advisors of another Finnish company called Zero Gravity, and they actually came out of the European Space Agency accelerator. And what they do is they take a lot of this Copernicus satellite data, and then they combine it with drone data and other sources of data to actually help cities understand where they should be doing planning, and understanding, what kind of heat sources and other kind of things need to be considered in different cities. So you have a lot of companies that are able to take advantage of the huge expense that others have made. It's kind of like, a number of people had to invest a lot of money getting the internet out there, and then of course everyone just builds on top of that. But then of course there's also getting more and more people across the world access to really good internet services, and that's going to unleash another billion entrepreneurs, hopefully, across areas that have not been as exposed to internet services as we have in our regions. So I think that's going to be really exciting. And one of the things we see in Europe actually is in this New Horizon Europe funding program over the next 7 years, there's going to be a lot of opportunities for collaboration with African innovation, for example, and their ability to get access to data and get access to services will create some really exciting new opportunities that we can all benefit from. So space, I think going up there to do more down here, I think that's one of the keys.
Yes, because there's so much actually discussion around, is it sustainable for Earth or even like governments or agencies to spend taxpayers' money on space exploration? And then there's also another discussion which says whatever that is happening in the outer space or even space exploration is helping the planet Earth. So there's always like these discussions going on, and it's quite fascinating to do different analysis. And as you mentioned, which is like quite fascinating and at the same time very accurate, that with the providing access to the remote areas for internet, it would definitely unleash billions of entrepreneurs that didn't have that kind of like easy access to the internet. And obviously like it would unleash the innovation and the discovery of different technologies or different industries that we've never had before, or perhaps enhance whatever we're using. So that's also great. And in terms of the VC funding, I mean, with all these changes in the space industry, we've seen advancements, and specifically, for example, as you mentioned, using satellites either for different purposes, commercializations and so forth. And specifically in the agriculture industry, we see that there's like so much like the agriculture industry is kind of like outdated because there's like still like farmers are not really using kind of like advanced technologies, for example precision agriculture, in terms of using specific soil that has efficient kind of like nutrition towards kind of like planting different crops that are sustained or sustainable towards that kind of like soil. So now we see using all those high technology, like different kind of radars and beams and lights from space, that you can actually measure that and then provide that data to the farmers so then they can actually use it wisely. So how do you see now with all these like different applications coming out of the space industry, how's the VCs looking in this? Because before that, space industry was all about rockets and risks, and obviously it doesn't provide, kind of like a liquid return, to your investment if you're a VC. And as you mentioned, it's always, about like your targets and so forth. How do you see that it has changed, and how are they looking at as a kind of like also an impact? Because we have impact investors. They're looking into invest in future technologies that are creating kind of like a impact on billions of lives.
Yeah, I think that if we use agriculture that you raised as a good example, one of the things that I think is going to, we work on a lot of consortiums involving farming technologies, not just the kind of recyclable elements of it, the bioeconomy, but also sensors and digitization of the farm. And one of the things I expect we'll see is more of the younger generation staying and investing and working on farms as they become more digitized, because what they'll figure out is that there's a lot more opportunity actually to create something very special in terms of new technologies, new capabilities, the ability to say Uberize robots and drones across a wide area of farms, so that you don't have to, necessarily buy and invest all that capital expense in a lot of equipment. So traditional farming, was a very capital intensive and human intensive activity. But now what we can do is we can do lots of really interesting things by connecting robots and other machines together, and then actually the farmer or the cooperative, maybe behind the farmer, and also the supply chain can get access to real-time data about what's going on with the farm. And I think that that's a huge opportunity for VCs, but also for entrepreneurs and entrepreneurs who may come from a farming family or farming background. And that actually might help to stimulate, there was kind of for a few years in some countries, there was like a drain of resources where younger generation were moving away from the farms. And but now I think that in some areas that's going to actually reverse, because people will figure out, hey, there's a lot of opportunity here to create new business models, not just on one farm, but on services that can be offered across farms across the world, and not just the farm, the whole supply chain. And I think VCs need, there are some really interesting VCs actually popping up now that are focused on, say, food
Right.
and agriculture, and they look at things in a very different way. So I think that there's a big opportunity here.
Yeah, that's a great point in terms of raising the next generation of farmers that are technology kind of like savvy, and they use the technology in farming industry. And I believe COVID was also another kind of like ringing the bell for us, or the reminder that the food industry is very important, because we were about to also being kind of like in shortage of, supply chain in food industry, right? I mean, with all these like challenging things that were actually happening as a result of COVID. But it is great that you also mentioned that, and you're also involved with the IC. Sorry, were you?
I was just going to actually say, we're also seeing a lot of interesting projects around vertical farms and bringing farming closer to the city or closer to logistics areas. And I saw a really interesting story the other day about a company that puts farms in shipping containers. Mm-hmm. And of course they become mobile farms, and you can imagine all kinds of opportunities if you can move the farm around across different seasons and different supply chains,
or maybe different planets.
Different planets, exactly.
Yes, because there's also now researchers are actually doing a lot of research on CRISPR technology, and using that in space. Obviously, because in space, or even like on Mars or on the moon, there would be a kind of like a shortage of kind of green areas, obviously, or even like having, it's very difficult to create an environment for crops. So then CRISPR technology can actually help that to kind of like generate that kind of like food supply chain that is needed. So it's what do you think of that? Is there any kind of like company that you know or involved that is working in the biotech and perhaps across from the space industry?
Yeah, I know some. There's a Nordic VC that focuses on food, and he's a colleague of mine at Singularity University, a guy called Lauri Reuter. He's just had a big TV show actually in Finland where he's been flying around the world looking at really weird ways that people are actually developing food technologies. And I think actually he's been involved in this kind of thing, and I can actually give you access to him. He would be a fascinating guest, and he runs a Nordic VC focused on food technologies. But when it comes to, it's almost like this convergence. You've got the CRISPR technology that's, moving up, one scale, and then you've got like robotic technology, then you've got sensors, then you've got the data and the awareness and knowing what's going on in the actual kind of farming environment or the contained environment where you might be growing stuff. So all of this stuff is like happening at the same time. And I think that's where, the really smart money is kind of going to go. It's not just focused on one area. It's like, okay, you've got CRISPR technology that's growing in capability, but what happens if I then combine it with the ability to efficiently harvest and nurture what it's actually able to develop? So when you start combining stuff, and this is, one thing that I got exposed to at Singularity University a lot is the opportunity of combinational technologies, which then drive more exponential growth and then open up new opportunities for new entrepreneurs to come in and build on top of that. So
that's I believe that would be providing access and kind of like inspiration, because everything is possible. I mean, you mentioned Singularity University and how they are kind of like involved with different like projects, X Prize, for example, awards, or the biggest kind of like solving the biggest problems and the biggest challenges that are impacting billions of lives on Earth. And that's the I believe the clear message that everything is possible as long as you believe in your ambition and you have the perseverance to follow that. And that's I believe that's very promising for the future that we are moving forward to.
And I think the other thing is that no one has a monopoly on good ideas. So,
every idea is a great idea.
And then someone comes in and on the other side of the planet and looks at it in a different way, and they have a different problem to solve, but they realize that there's this kind of base technology that they can develop from. So that's one of the really interesting things about it. It's not always developing new technology. Often it's just kind of combining that piece of tech with a new piece that, allows you to do something completely transformational.
That's true. So you've been involved with the ecosystems and the tech a lot. And you also mentioned that you're involved with the ICT and mobility. If we can also mention that, and then perhaps I can go back to my comment and question.
Yeah, sure. I'm a kind of older IT guy from corporate life, but for the last 3-4 years, I've been working a lot more with startups and SMEs. And in Spinverse, we get to work with different combinations across Europe of who are developing both high-end projects. Could be in quantum computing, it could be in all kinds of different aspects of artificial intelligence across different industries. But I would say that the area I'm probably most focused on at the moment is electronics and mobility, and growing that space. And we've been driving some interesting projects at the moment around autonomous electric vehicles, and also combining moving vehicles together with drones, trying to get them to kind of sync up. And also working a lot with mobility in maritime industry, as well as railway industry. So we from a mobility perspective, we we cut across all the different elements of road, rail, sea, and air. And then, of course, it's also about the data and the regulations and understanding the bigger picture of what has to happen to secure autonomous electric transportation or hydrogen, indeed hydrogen. So we're seeing a massive growth in hydrogen investment opportunities in Europe at the moment, especially in the Nordic region.
And why is that?
Sorry?
And why is that? It's also kind of like another discussion that is also happening among VCs, I've heard. Everybody's investing in this sector. I
think there are a lot of countries like in Netherlands and Portugal, Spain, Finland, Denmark especially. They figured out Denmark, I think, is a really good example to look at, because what they're doing is connecting their wind generation investments and capabilities together with the development of electrolyzers to produce green hydrogen. And that's requiring a lot of traditional energy companies to work with different organizations in different ways, and also developing new value chains in terms of storage of hydrogen, or production of hydrogen, storage and distribution of it. And then, trying to figure out also where the customer's going to be for that hydrogen, whether it's going to be in shipping industry or heavy trucks or buses, or the hydrogen just as a kind of storage device for energy in general. So all of these things are really taking off, I would say, in Europe at the moment. But it's and there's so many kind of side applications and side opportunities for new business models to be built on top of these huge kind of industrial transformations, like a move to hydrogen. So, and I think that's the key, is for the VCs is to spot that opportunity, or to spot the company that's already spotted the opportunity. And then how do you support them in the right way? How do you get them into the right kind of collaborations with the corporates who are maybe, making the big investments? And I think it's a two-way street as well. It's how can you make the corporations that are involved in, energy or hydrogen development to figure out that, hey, there's some really exciting companies, startups, and also VCs that would benefit from deeper collaboration with the corporate organizations. So, yeah.
Interesting. You also mentioned that you're involved with the ICT, and you just mentioned mobility. How do you see that ICT is keeping up in terms of what is actually happening in the technology, like information and communications, obviously, and how do you relate that to the obviously latest technology of blockchain? And now we can see, like we saw blockchain, well, we saw Bitcoin blockchain, and now DeFi, decentralized finance, that is actually glowing, as you mentioned, layers on top of each other, different protocols. How do you see that the ICT can keep up with the latest technologies? And also we see that there's so much regulation problems, like the regulators don't even understand the technology, let alone just regulate it. And it's expanding so fast. And now we see NFTs, non-fungible tokens, that are kind of like being massively adopted and being kind of like hyped, and by retail investors even, because the technology is enabling a participation of mass, which is kind of like democratizing the space for everyone to own a piece of art, to own kind of like basically anything digital through cryptocurrency. How do you also see that? I mean, there's like so many questions into that, but I hope that.
Let me try and unpack that. ICT is such a broad kind of area, if you include, telecommunications as well. But if we, specifically regarding your point about blockchain, I'm not a blockchain expert, but I know that. Let me step back. Actually, you mentioned this thing about regulators, and part of the problem is that the regulation is always moving quite a long way or some way behind the technology. So the technology gets deployed in some form, and it exposes a big opportunity, but then it exposes a challenge, and then obviously the regulation has to catch up. And in different regions, the regulation takes different forms, and hopefully there's some kind of harmonization across regulation across the world. But that standards can take a long time. So you've constantly got this problem where new opportunity is also creating new problems. But when it comes back to, say, discussion around blockchain, I was looking around how blockchain technology could be used in controlling the use of drones for delivering things, and also controlling where the drones go and what they're authorized to do. And then there was some companies also looking at blockchain smart contracts for also being authenticizing the pickup and delivery schedules of different things. So I don't tend to think about blockchain from a financial perspective. I look at it from practical applications.
And authentication and the trust and the smart contract.
The trust. And so, for example,
anonymity.
Exactly. So if you get a drone, I'll say drone or robot, if it strays out of line or if it goes into the wrong place, then you could use that blockchain record to actually prevent it from doing anything in the future. And then you'd also have an audit trail of where the drone has been, what it's done, what data is captured, what's it's transmitted, all kinds of things. So I mean, blockchain is it's such a kind of
broad, very broad
concept that can be applied in so many different ways, and you know far more about it than I do. But
well, I mean, I know that it has different use cases in different kind of industries. For example, for healthcare, it is great because there is always privacy issues, health data, and then because of that, there's so much silos of data, legacy data that are the fragmentation of healthcare, for example, data. So with the technology of blockchain, perhaps we can anonymize that data, and then those files could be also converted easily. They could be accessed by different bioinformatic experts, because now that data is so anonymized, you don't know who owns that data, you don't know whose data it is. So then you can share it with different experts to convert those files into a kind of a file that is readable. But before that, you have to there's obviously we have, for example, in Europe, there's GDPR, and each country is another thing about healthcare is so regulated that, for example, even we do have European Union, we have GDPR, and then again, each country owns their own data. And then you go to the different countries, hospitals, and then private industry, they own your data because they deal with the healthcare and they deal directly with the patients. And again, there's kind of a very incorporated system that is very, very kind of fragmented. It's not easy to access, and it all goes through. I mean, the end discussion is health privacy. So with the anonymization and using blockchain, obviously that could be possible. And then again, we go, for example, to accounting. For the accounting, you can see the different process of, for example, the task that has been, kind of verified and it's been authenticated simultaneously. Or you can see in the supply chain, you can see the source of, for example, if it's, salmon, or if it's rice, you can see the source where it's coming. If it's a fake, for example, product or no, you can again, track. Follow the track and see where it's coming from and who the end user and the first user is. So each industry is providing a different kind of perspective and application.
Yeah, sorry. And can I ask, do you see a particular industry that's moving ahead further, or are there some that are just kind of missing the opportunity completely at the moment?
Yes, for example, we see in financial industry, it's moving very fast. Decentralized finance, obviously, now, with different kind of companies that are putting Bitcoin in their balance sheets, it would enable different exchanges, the cryptocurrency exchanges, to go ahead and provide that opportunity to the retail investors or people that are not, for example, based in the US to participate in the stock exchange. They can purchase, for example, stock of Tesla that they have Bitcoin in their balance sheets to purchase from China, if it's allowed to be in that platform. I mean, or someone in Africa can purchase a piece of, for example, that stock, or own a little bit of Tesla just because they have Bitcoin.
Okay.
It is providing a lot of opportunities to the people that don't have that kind of like access. But then at the same time, it's providing a 24/7. Like, you don't have to wait for the market to open for you. I mean, market is always open, and that's how blockchain started from Bitcoin. And we see that mostly it's being kind of like advanced in the industry, and there's so much innovation happening. There's like, now we see, for example, digital arts is entering into that. You can basically verify anything in JPEG or video, which, I mean, it has massive application, again, for example, in healthcare. So you can use the health data as NFT, non-fungible tokens, and then that NFT could be again used. For example, you can mint your DNA as an NFT, and then if it's a celebrity's DNA, you can own a piece of that, and kind of like DNA.
Okay.
So we see this is like, and it's going so fast, that it's just keeping up with that is also kind of like a challenge, and at the same time excitement. But this is a great, I mean, area. But obviously, this discussion is about you and what you've been involved. But this is quite fascinating. And how do you see the future of technology? How do you see which like industries are going to be trending more for perhaps till at the end of 2021 and even 2022?
I would say that, I mean, energy is really exciting at the moment, because there's so many people working on solving so many problems, and exposing the results of what they're doing as well. So, if anyone's running kind of pilot projects in the US or in China or in a European country, very quickly others learn from that and they build upon it. And it might not just be a technology kind of activity, it also might be how it's applied and what can be built around it as well. I would say energy, also agriculture. We're seeing a lot of opportunity in terms of applying different technologies, from sensors, from artificial intelligence, augmented reality control of robots across a wide range of farms, these kind of things, agriculture, energy, and of course transportation. So what's happening with actually in the last year, since the COVID pandemic has been underway, we've seen a lot of pilots around Nordic cities of autonomous vehicles, either small robots going around doing certain things. They could be doing cleaning missions and replacing workers, or they've been testing a lot of transportation vehicles as well. And so the learnings that these mobility autonomous vehicle companies have generated, not just for themselves, but also for the cities, for the governments in the last year, will then be used to stimulate more investment in mobility as well. And it's not just in cities, it's also around ports and logistic areas and airports. Of course, airports have been very quiet, so they've been able to do a lot of testing, experimentation as well. And so you see energy, you see transportation, you see food, all of these things kind of accelerating. And then, of course, as you mentioned, space technology, sending things up there so that we can actually improve life down here. So it's not just about going to Mars and the moon, it's also about creating a better planet for everyone. So that's going to continue. I actually saw this Finnish company that's developing this wooden satellite. So what they're doing is they want to see how wooden materials behave in space. And all of the learnings that you can get from that, and all of the applications that could benefit as a result of learning from that particular experiment. So when you see things like this happening, you start thinking, oh my God, it's bigger than just an industry.
Right.
Because very quickly, when if you're developing a technology for one industry, it very rapidly kind of jumps into another industry, and then they do something completely different with it, and then it just keeps going around and round. So you have the tech, but then you have the industrial application, and it's just like
commercial,
a constant cycle of innovation. So, but I would say that augmented virtual reality, there's going to be huge opportunities for training, for example, not just, for example, in hospitals. Hospitals, they buy and sell a lot of hardware and software. And what we're seeing now is increased opportunities for training a lot of their staff in the different technologies that are supplied by different vendors. So what would happen if you had a platform, say a platform where any supplier of medical equipment could basically offer virtual reality training to the hospital, and that is profound. The opportunities around that are profound because you could get the equipment deployed and trained a lot faster in the hospitals, a lot cheaper. It would take the staff away from their critical duties for less time, and over time you bring down the cost of healthcare as well. So these kind of things are really interesting.
And so basically, we see that now companies do not literally have a jurisdiction in terms of geographic jurisdiction, but now it's in terms of the global presence through digitalization of the economy. Like specifically, you mentioned about the healthcare, and now we see telehealth is expanding more. Now it enables doctors to visit, for example, patients in Africa. And I believe Philips has actually provided that kind of also access to the patients there. But it's quite fascinating. Anything else before we say goodbye?
Oh no, I think it's just so exciting because there's so much going on that doesn't actually need to be invented. So very often, if someone comes up with a good idea, the chances are that someone's actually either come up with a similar concept or they've tried it, but maybe they haven't really pushed it. They haven't got access to the right capital or the right supporting infrastructure to really. So how do you plug all of the different people and organizations together to actually accelerate things? That's basically what drives me. And that's what is really interesting about this open innovation consortium approach, where you bring together these different organizations instead of just doing stuff in silos, which is, okay, you might need to do that sometimes, but it's very inefficient in the long term. So, yeah.
That's great. Looking forward to that. And perhaps we can touch base in the next, few months to see how technology is advancing in your kind of network and ecosystem in Finland.
Sure, that would be great. Look forward to it. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you so much, Patrick.